Seema Kumar is VP Innovation, Global Public Health, and Science Policy Communication at Johnson & Johnson. And she's going to make some comments. We're going to kind of do it as a little bit of a me and you Q&A, if that's okay with you.
Absolutely.
Okay, I'm going to change microphones, and I'm going to sit at this microphone, and we can all hear everyone, I think, and we can see you in your red.
The Johnson & Johnson red.
The Johnson & Johnson red. Is that what you wore? Wow. I wore the Scientific American dark blue.
And the purple.
And the purple.
Yes.
So I'm going to be frank here.
Okay.
Why are you here? Why do you want to support science journalism?
Well, it's twofold. One, it's a personal passion of mine because I grew up as a science journalist. I actually grew up as a scientist. And like the young lady before who was talking, my father was a scientist. I was going to be a scientist and a physicist, and that's what I was doing on my way to being a scientist. When something funny happened, I started writing as a hobby and started getting published. And so I was like, wow, looking at my own name in print and being able to express my opinions was just a wonderful thing. So rather than go sit in a nuclear facility in the basement of a nuclear lab in India and work at BARC, I decided that I was going to move into science journalism, came to University of Maryland at College Park, worked under John Franklin, who was a two-time Pulitzer Prize-winning science writer of the Baltimore Sun, went to work at Johns Hopkins, NIH, and then the Whitehead Institute during the Human Genome Project, and then came to Johnson & Johnson. And at that time, people asked me, wow, you're going to the dark side. People at MIT said, wow, this is a big move. And I got there, and having just finished writing a lot about the Human Genome Project, I went to industry, and I was believing what I was writing, which was that the next day we were all going to wake up, and suddenly we were going to have all kinds of treatments and cures for cancer, for Alzheimer's disease, for Parkinson's, for all of those things. And lo and behold, you get into industry, and you figure out that it is not easy to make a molecule into a medicine, and that it takes 10 years, $10 billion. I don't know what the current stats are, and you have lots and lots of failures that you have to eat up in order to bring those medicines forward. And looking at the science, and I was hired into Johnson & Johnson to actually really create a new department focused on educating and bringing forward more awareness of the science that goes on in industry, and I learned a lot along the way. And so I think my passion also, both on behalf of industry, Johnson & Johnson, as well as myself, is I see that the science that happens within industry, and I'm not talking about marketing, here I'm not talking about other stuff, but even things like discovery, development, all of that happens goes mostly uncovered by science journalists, because I think that most of the time we're focused on the basic science, which I think is very important. But speaking of lost in translation, we don't focus as much on the translation that takes place and the amount of work that goes into it. Same thing with students, same thing with the curriculum. We're finding that the STEM pipeline is leaking. People aren't coming into. And many times, young students think that the only way after doing a graduate studies or PhD is to go into academia and become a professor or work in a lab. Very few have awareness that you can actually go be a scientist in the industry setting. So for all of those reasons.
Yeah, we're kind of in this era of de-siloing. There's obviously lots of discussions about the partnerships between academia and industry, and let me throw into that ecosystem journalism, because I've had many friends who were journalists who then started to work for industry, and of course that narrative of you went over to the dark side, as if, is that dichotomy real? Is journalism from Venus and industry from Mars, or what is that relationship? Obviously a journalist is trained to be skeptical and skeptical of the sources, but obviously it sounds to me like what you're suggesting is there should be an interest in what industry is doing, because obviously it affects all of us, and it's also a way to communicate that translational phase.
Absolutely. I think that what industry does affects society. And, we pay for products, we pay for medicines. We should be interested in how the science that takes place in industry and understand it better. But I think it's mostly covered by business journalists, which is okay, I suppose. But focus ends up being on the business. So, for example, when I was at the Whitehead Institute at MIT, little by little, the health section of the Boston Globe slowly went away, got cut, and science journalists became freelance journalists trying to do freelance jobs to keep their profession up. And then the biotech, the business part of the journal started to blossom, and that's because people, young scientists from MIT and Harvard and other places were setting up biotech companies, little startups here and there. And Kendall Square, go visit it now, it's just this vibrant place. And most of it was covered by the business section of the Globe. And now what ends up happening is that the explanatory aspect of science and how science works and the beauty, the awe, the implications, the challenges don't get covered because it's all about this person did a deal with that person and their drug got approved by the FDA. That's what it's all about. And that makes news. So I'm actually very, very happy that Stat News has come along, which I think is phenomenal and wonderful. But I feel that as science journalists, we have to educate journalists to better cover the science that takes place in industry. It's been a black box for a long time and continues to be, except when it becomes a controversy. Yeah.
Right. Speaking of controversies and the fact that we want a quick fix, let's just talk quickly about the nature of media. I'm going to paraphrase here, and I don't have the direct quote, and I'm sure someone's going to fact check this, and I'll be all over the press tomorrow, but I think Louis C.K., the comedian, recently said something to the effect of social media is heroin and long-form traditional newspapers is nutrition. And he would rather stick with the more meditated, slower forms. I'm probably botching this, but it's an interesting idea if he said it or not. So are we in this crazy, hyper megaphone era? And does that do a disservice to some of the stories that are, in fact, more complex? And we've talked about false dichotomies here. We've talked about, you need to consider these things. There's so many shades of gray. Is that hurting the way we communicate science, not just journalism, but also messages in any kind?
I think it's a double-sided sword, or actually it's actually something that has a benefit and a risk to it. So the risk is that, and as I told you, John Franklin was my advisor, and so in those days, his whole thesis was the advent of yellow journalism in covering science, because people didn't understand science, and so therefore the way they covered science was yellow journalism. And then, of course, I grew up in India when we still used the telegraph, believe it or not. And so when I tweet, it occurs to me that we're using 140 characters. This is like in India, you have to pay like 1 rupee for each character that you put in there. So, and you only had this much money, and so you had to telegraph your news to somebody far away. So tweeting, that's what we are in. The Daily Telegraph is what it is. You're telegraphing information. And when you try to do science that way by tweeting, I think it sometimes it's hard to do it. You can do it creatively if you're really able to put into concise terms what science is all about. But most of the time, it's about controversy. And what ends up happening is that it is sort of you have the risk that you're going to fall into this trap of yellow journalism, again, through Twitter. But on the other hand, I have a 17-year-old. I don't know if he ever has read or will ever read again anything that's in long form. Because, the way I can engage him and I can talk to him is by texting him and tweeting him. So I think there's an opportunity as well on this, because we can use Twitter and other social media to engage the younger audiences in science which I think is we need to do if we want the next generation and the pipeline of scientists to come into STEM careers.
So we have to be ever vigilant that we don't let the formal limitations of the medium dictate how the conversation is flowing, and we don't want to miss parts of it, but you're also saying we can use those new tools to get those young people engaged. I mean, everyone's on screens now. Everyone is, even in this room, where we encourage tweeting from an event, right? And so you look around, we're looking at stuff.
Yeah.
I use it as a way to pretend I'm actually tweeting, but I'm like doing something else.
Checking your email.
But it is fascinating, not to get too Marshall McLuhan here or Neil Postman, but the medium does set the agenda, and certainly I would love to see the evolution of this. Not that we are going to get back to long form, and my children certainly aren't going to digest that maybe the way I did, but I'd like to believe that the nuances of a story, and if journalism is done right, all of that can shine through. I mean, we can inspire people with the beauty of science, the challenge of it, and certainly the multiplicity of stakeholders vested in the conversation of science.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, the risk is that, you're trigger happy with your fingers. And so it's easy to just kind of like tweet out something that may be inaccurate, may not be substantive. And then there is no way you can delete the tweet, but it's gone, it's there. And but I think on the other hand, the visualization techniques that we have today, videos and other ways to showcase science, just gives us tremendous opportunities to engage a new generation. And I think the older generation are also starting to understand its power. When you actually start using it, it's pretty powerful. And so I think the medium is the message, and I think that social media offers us an incredible opportunity. And once again, for the journalism students and science journalism students, it's come full circle. So how do you tell a story in a concise way, and how do you use visuals to engage the public? I think is going to be very important, and not use the medium to really be a medium just only for controversy.
Right,
but it can also be for explanatory journalism. Edification, education.
Access to information.
Access
Obviously,
to
that
information.
is the goal of all of this, is
That is
access
the goal
to
of
real.
all of this, yes.
Well, we'll see how it evolves. Both the medium and science is always evolving, and we're always evolving. So I want to thank you for supporting this discussion today, and for supporting what I think are doing, which is honestly addressing all of these issues. So thank you again, and thanks for being here.
Thank you, Jeremy, and thank you to Scientific American for organizing.